Good to be with you. Am I coming in too loud here? A little loud? No? Good? Okay, you can hear me. All right, rise and shine. Welcome to everybody joining us on YouTube and Facebook. Pleasure to have you in the space. We are really in a place of self-discovery when we come here on a Sunday morning. That this is a course that's tomorrow night. This is a service where really it's on you to navigate your experience of this material. The material is an invitation. It's a way of opening yourself to a different form of inquiry, where you begin to turn your attention away from objects and things going on in the world, and you begin to pay attention to your own state of mind and your own way of being. And you begin to see that through this act of self-inquiry or bringing awareness to awareness, you begin to unlock these parts of yourself that were undiscovered, laying dormant or latent. And what we're told as we do this, and the experience will follow, is that we begin to feel a more expanded view of self. We feel a more peaceful state of mind. We are coming into a place of regaining a deeper sense of our own naturalness, which means that we're also connecting to the deeper fabric of nature. And so one of the telltale signs that you're abiding within the true nature of yourself is you begin to feel a deep empathy or a deep compassion with all living beings. In fact, as you know, some of these simple injunctions of our Judeo-Christian teaching point at, that we love our neighbor as ourselves, and then really, if you look at the deeper logic, because our neighbor is ourself. We pray for our enemies because deep down we're only seeing ourselves as that enemy and attacking a part of ourself. And so all of the ethics and all of the morals of religion and spirituality really hinge on this deeper unity. That's what they're getting us to pay attention to. So when we start in these outer courtyards of the temple of the self, oftentimes it shows up as ethical and moral virtue. That's where we kind of cut our teeth spiritually. Right? We clean up. And in that cleaning up, we begin to acclimate to a deeper unity consciousness. Even if we don't know it, we might just think we're being good Americans or we're being good people. So in the way that our conditioned mind responds to following an ethical or a moral path, it could just be a civil religion. It could just be a very secularized religion. Or it can be an exclusive religion at first, where my in-group is the only true teaching or the only true path, and yet I'm still cultivating morals and a deeper sense of ethics. And I'm beginning to pattern my right and wrong on a higher principle other than my own desires. So one of the things that we want to recognize then is, as Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, people from everywhere follow my path, because all of these paths eventually lead to the Supreme. And so wherever you find yourself beginning, even if it seems to be far off, as long as you're desiring and intending to turn your attention away from objects and begin to look at your own state of mind and begin to question, who am I? What's the nature of life? What's the truth of myself? Then you begin to have this connection to the divine, and it begins to pull you in, right? And eventually you'll, like the river, meet the sea. And so what we try to do here on a Sunday morning is speed that along. And so we like to bring in some of the teachings that are direct, that have you realize that, in fact, you are this self already. You are the self in all beings already. And the joy is actually here. And the reason why we don't feel the fulfillment or the joy or the peace or that calm and expansive self is because we are actively, albeit unconsciously most of the time, obscuring it. And so we obscure it with a way of thinking and being that we call me and my life. And that is the obscuration. The obscuration is I am some other self other than the true self, and I live apart and separate from it. And as a result of paying attention to that self, I am now an object in my awareness. I am not awareness itself. I am a character or a mask or a personality. I am a separate being. And because I start off as a separate being, everything I look at is then tainted with that ubiquity of my separateness. So I can't help but experience separateness in when I interact with others. I can't help feeling fragmented and seeing you as fragmented if that's my premise or where I start from in my moment-by-moment perception. And what is the opposite of your true self is you don't feel fulfilled right now. Right? That's why the self is always getting distracted, the little self. It always needs constant stimulation. It always needs to look away from where it really is in order to find something, like a binky or a security blanket or something that will alleviate its gnawing anxiety of being separate. And the only way that that gnawing anxiety can actually calm down is when you turn your attention away from objects. Get out of the distractions. I mean, look at the culture we are in. We're addicts to our devices. They're designed, the guy that created Facebook about 6 or 7 years ago, he said that we designed this to give you the dopamine hits. It was a psychological engineering so that you get addicted to your devices. And most of us carry a device that has a bitten apple on it. So what does that tell you? It's this way of thinking that throws you outside of the garden. You take your device and you're now east of Eden. You're another self in another world, and you're seeking in the chaos of your separateness what you're trying to find, which is already yours, this deeper self that you've never left. And so these teachings are potent. But here's the rub. They only work. They can only be experienced when you're ready. So that's why, when we are in a place of willing to separate and willing to be distracted, even if we come here, oftentimes you can find yourself still battling internally with these other habit patterns and impulses and tendencies. And sometimes for a little while, it actually takes a lot of muster and inner courage and strength to kind of quell those impulses that have you distracting away from this conversation. That's part of working your muscles. It's like a little chick getting out of an egg. Right? The egg is there actually to strengthen the muscles of the chick. And so without that chick struggling to get out of the egg, it doesn't have the muscles to survive in that new environment that it's birthing into. So that's why when we start here, we start oftentimes at the ethical and moral level, struggling against our vices, trying to cultivate our virtues, and dealing with these impulses and habit patterns that take us away from our spiritual evolution. And so this is the jihad. This is the struggle. This is where we actually test who we are and get our real deep sense of our character and what we want. So when you come here and you're given a offering of these immediate teachings, if you don't really want them, it'll be like, that's interesting. But in the next minute, like Ramakrishna says, those teachings are like a drop of water on a hot burner. And that hot burner is your mind that is addicted to the thinking of the world. And so when you get a teaching that is pointing you to your true self, and your mind is still very much into the world and into being the body and into chasing after objects, these teachings fizzle away, and you won't remember them. And that's also part of it. But as he says in A Course in Miracles, there's something that gets in. There's a little bit that gets in, and it goes into your storehouse, as he calls it in the Course. And in that storehouse, you have these other impulses of finding your true self, waking up, being who you truly are, knowing yourself as God knows you. So these impulses are in your storehouse, and you might go on in the worldly sense for a long time, but there will be a moment when you encounter somebody that will then trigger, because you're ready, all of these latent tendencies that you've already had deposited within your storehouse, and they will come to the surface, and you'll be ready to shake off the sleep and be who you truly are. So that's what we're up to this morning. I hope you enjoy the ride. We're going to be looking eastward in the beginning at the Upanishads. We're going to also be looking at other teachings coming from the Heart of Awareness Sutra, Sri Ramana Maharshi, and then, of course, we will put the cherry on top with A Course in Miracles. And really, this is a service that's all about you. Isn't that nice? In our narcissistic age, that's what we want to hear. It's all about you. It's about yourself. And what we'll come to realize is that this self is the only thing that you really want. That's what's really crazy. It's like we've been conditioned away from even knowing how to find happiness. That's why, again, in A Course in Miracles, Jesus will say that the ego, or that little self that you think you are, its motto is seek but never find. So we are always having this gnawing anxiety, this need for fulfillment, this need for deep peace and joy and love and satisfaction. And we go out into the objects and people of the world, and we never find it. And so what we're saying here, and the basic premise of what we're going to be looking at in the Upanishads in a moment, is that what you're really looking for is yourself, the real you. And how lovely the fact that you really are it already. We actually, remember, are just clearing the mirror, removing the obscurations, and truly seeing what's here now already as you. The one listening is you. The one that knows is the self you're looking for. So the Upanishads, if you don't know, are part of a teaching that's called Vedanta. Vedanta means the end of the Vedas. And the Vedas are the great mantric ritual literature of ancient India. And so you have the four Vedas, Atharva, Rig, Sama, and Yajur. And then you have the commentaries and the ritual directions of how to perform the Vedas as separate bodies of literature. And then at the very end, the last body of literature attached to this whole string or tradition are the Upanishads. That's why they come at the end of the Vedas, and they're called Vedanta, the end of the Vedas. But they're also playing on something else. Veda means knowledge. And so Vedanta also means the fulfillment of knowledge, the completion of knowledge, the end game of what human existence is directed towards. And so the Upanishads, the name itself just means sitting near devotedly, right? This is back to who are you paying attention to? If you're paying attention to the rishi in the forest, as these teachings imply, you're sitting there devotedly. You come to listen and learn. You put away all distractions for an hour. And you get to see something for yourself that you didn't come in here knowing. But if you show up as the old self, still distracted by the same old things that your old self is distracted to, there's no devotion. And you always get what you give. So sitting near devotedly means that you're ready for the esoteric teaching. You're ready for the directions that will prompt you to the end of knowledge or the transcendence of your little self. And this is taken from the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. It's the Upanishad that comes from the brightness within the forest, Brihadaranyaka. And this is Yajnavalkya. You're getting some good names. When I used to teach yoga philosophy years ago, I would always say something like to the effect of, if you're, for the younger people, if you're looking to name your kid, pay attention. You can have a little Yajnavalkya running around. So Yajnavalkya speaks to his wife Maitreyi because he's actually going into the forest to retire, right? He's done his deal with society. He went through his early training as a brahmachari, and then he had a householder's life. He raised his kids. He earned a good living. He passed on his inheritance to his kids. Him and his wife, or actually in this case, wives, different culture. He had 2 of them. And maybe that's why he's trying to run away. No, I'm sorry. Anyway, Yajnavalkya is in the forest. He's about to take that sannyasi, recluse, total abandonment of everything that relates to the body and the world. And so he says to his wife, you have always been dear to me, Maitreyi. And just to back up for a moment, he's leaving. She goes, where are you going? He says, I'm off to basically establish clearly in my life the nature of immortality. And she goes, well, why wouldn't I want to do that? Because what is it other than immortality that's worth seeking? So this is where her husband says, you have always been dear to me, Maitreyi, and I love you even more now that you have asked me about immortality. Sit here by my side, Upanishad, and reflect deeply on what I say. Now listen to this and take it to heart, because it's a universal, timeless truth based on realization. And you too can verify this, prove it, by your realization. A wife loves her husband not for his own sake, dear, but because the self lives in him. Right? The self is the divine soul. A husband loves his wife not for her own sake, but because the self lives in her. Children are loved not for their own sake, but because the self lives in them. Wealth is loved not for its own sake, but because the self lives in it. The universe is not loved for its own sake, but because the self lives in it. The gods are loved not for their own sake, but because the self, the one, lives in them. Creatures are not loved for their own sake, but for the self. Everything is loved not for its own sake, but because the self lives in it. So in other words, then, you can only love what you are. And as faint or distorted a picture as we get through the lens of husband, wife, creatures, wealth, etc., the only charge of love and attraction that we feel through those objects and forms is the remnant or the residue or the afterglow or echo of the light of truth or the light of God or the light of the self. So this is why Yajnavalkya then says to his wife, this self has to be realized because everything else is empty. If you don't know the one, you won't understand the many. This is why we flounder. This is why we endlessly search and never find. Remember, the one you're looking for is you. And you see glimmers of it in other bodies and objects and wealth and status, but it's actually just afterglow of your own self. So the self has to be realized. Hear about this self and meditate upon him. When you hear about the self, meditate upon the self, and finally realize the self, you come to understand everything in life. Okay? And then he goes on, he says, everything confuses those who regard things as separate from the self. So that means back to this little I that I think I am, the I that is seeking but never finding, right? Like when you come into this church, again, if you are giving yourself a modicum of self-awareness and attention, you begin to see, okay, well, what brings me here? What is my deeper purpose of sitting in this seat for an hour? What am I looking for? And that is, there is a desire, whether you are fully aware of it or not, to be who you truly are and to feel the freedom of that, to feel the joy of that, to wake up to it. And so when that isn't known, that little I is confusion itself. It doubts everything. It doesn't understand anything. It has its own view, its own form of knowledge, but it never leads to satiation, to quietude, to enlightened understanding. So this is why he says, if you are unaware of the self, you don't understand anything and exist in confusion. Just take a moment. What's really important also is when this enters or when you hear the spoken word, you want to kind of just let things settle again, get into a place of receptivity. As it just said, you meditate on the self, which means you go into a quiet, deep inquiry. And as we're going to look in a moment at the teachings of Sri Ramana, the inquiry is very simple in his teaching. It is, who am I? Who's the one seeking? Who's the one that's being distracted? Who's the one that's confused? Who's the one that's full of anger? Who's the one that doubts? So it's not important to focus on the doubting, the confusion, the anxiety, the distraction. Who's the one that's getting lost in it? That's where you turn your inquiry. You look for the root of the I thought, and then you'll find the self. Because the I thought is the mask. It's what's covering up yourself. I am John is the mask. When I look to the root of where I am John comes from in my awareness, I'm willing to let go of the mask. That's why this teaching is oftentimes referred to as an uncovering, an unveiling, an unlearning, right? And as we'll see with Sri Ramana in a moment, it's also referred to as an uprooting. So questioners come to see him and ask him, how do we meditate? Right? If meditation on the self is so important, how do we meditate? Now, again, let me back up, because in the Vedanta, there is a very simple prescription. It's Shravana, it's you listen to the teaching. Manana, you turn it over in your mind, you see it from different angles, you test it, you weigh it, you consider it, you reflect upon it. And then nididhyasana, you take it into the quiet of your heart. And nididhyasana is meditation. So you take this question, who am I, into the quiet of your heart. You take it past the reason and the intellect. You'll never find who you are there. It's the wrong instrument. It's like trying to use a butter knife to cut down a tree. It's just not the right tool. So the intellect is the wrong instrument in finding yourself. That's why the unlearning or the unveiling is you have to get quiet. This can't be found through thinking. You can inspire and motivate yourself through thinking, but eventually you come to the meditation aspect where you get quiet and you allow this question, who am I, to have that nuclear impact within the heart. So actually the master asks the visitor, how do you meditate? And she says, I begin to ask myself, who am I? Eliminate body as not I, the breath as not I, the mind as not I, and I am not able to proceed further. The master, well, that is so far as the intellect goes. Your process is only intellectual. Indeed, all the scriptures mention the process only to guide the seeker to know the truth. The truth cannot be directly pointed out, hence this intellectual process. You see, the one who eliminates all the not I cannot eliminate the I, right? Because John's still meditating, right? It's, 9 o'clock, I got to go meditate. And that's never going to be eliminated. This is what we were saying earlier. These teachings will be a drop of water on a hot burner as long as you come and go as the I that you think you are. I am this body. I am my story. This is what I look like. This is my family. This is where I live. All of these designations are part of the construct. This service offers you a secret door to go beyond the construct. So, I am not this or I am that, all still is contained within the experience of being the I. This I is only the ego or the I thought. After the rising up of this I thought, all other thoughts arise. The I thought is therefore the root thought. If the root is pulled out, all others are at the same time uprooted. Therefore, seek the root I. Question yourself. Who am I? Find out its source. Then all these other things will vanish, and the pure self will remain forever. So then the visitor asks, well, how to do it? And the master, the I is always there in deep sleep, in dream, and in wakefulness. The one in sleep is the same as that one who now speaks. There is always the feeling of I. Otherwise, do you deny your existence? You do not say, you do not, he says, deny your existence. You say, I am. Find out who this I am is. This is why these teachings are so intimate and confronting, because they go directly to where you're saying, I. So then she goes, even so, I do not understand. I, you say, is the wrong I now. How to eliminate this wrong I? You need not eliminate the wrong I. How can I eliminate itself? All that you need do is to find out its origin and abide there. This is why, remember we were saying earlier, the outer court of ethics and morality, like you clean up your life, you balance out your relationships, you have integrity, you keep your word. All of these ethical, the Noble Eightfold Path of the Buddha, calibrates your perspective so that more and more you begin to align yourself with that deeper you. And as you do this, you begin to have the staying power of being able to hold the thought and not be pulled away. You see, if you're living a loose life and you're not living in integrity, you're not keeping your word, you don't have a real steady focus or desire to wake up, your inner resolve is very weak. It's like your mind is like the lens of your mind is wide, and so the light is not focused, right? The aperture is wide open, and so the light is scattered or dispersed. When you focus on waking up, and you do this in every area of your life, your mind becomes laser focused. And because the mind becomes so sharp and is able to stay on the question, who am I, for instance, you begin to burn through the illusions, right? You begin to come into a one-pointed concentration. And that will take you through the door. Because what you're basically saying is, I want to wake up now. I'm not interested in illusions anymore. I'm unwilling to be distracted. I want love. I want what I've been searching for out in the world in objects and bodies. I finally want to experience that. So he says again, you don't eliminate it, you go to where it abides. Your efforts can extend only thus far. Then he says, the beyond, with a capital B, will take care of itself. That's like what Jesus says in the Course. God will take that last step and carry you into knowledge, right? And then finishing up here. She says, if I am always here and now, why do I not feel so? He says, that is it. Who says it is not felt? Does the real I say it or the false I? Examine it. You will find it is the wrong I. I'm not happy. I'm bored. I'm distracted. I'm not at peace. I am angry. Right? This is all coming from the false I. He says, the wrong I is the obstruction. It has to be removed in order that the true I may not be hidden. The feeling that I have not realized is the obstruction to realization. Right? You're not getting anything. You're not going to discover something new. You're going to remove the distractions and the blocks and finally be what you always eternally are. And that will bring you to a state of peace and settledness and satisfaction. And that little I is not going to go quietly into the night. It's going to try to come on the road with you, on this road to awakening. And it will disguise itself as long as you're willing. And it will always be the disguise, if now you want to wake up, of I'm not there yet. So I'm not realized, he just said, is the block to realization. Let's see, anything else here? All that we need do is to remove the obstruction. That which is eternal is not known to be so because of ignorance. Ignorance is the obstruction. Get over the ignorance and all will be well. The ignorance is identical with the I thought. Find its source and it will vanish. Who's on board? Who wants to do that? So, this idea of uprooting who you think you are. He says the only real time that it probably will come into focus where you're going to want it is when you realize that you're miserable. Until you realize you're miserable, you're going to try every other way to maintain the not I or the false self. And this is where it again comes down to you're always getting what you want. You're always getting what you want because we are choosing moment by moment. But here's the rub that we don't see because we're blinded by appearances. By being the false self, we only look at form, right? Wealth, wives, husbands, accolades, status. And we think through this very childish, infantile perception that those forms and people can give us what we need. And by taking it or acquiring it from them, our little I will be happy. And our little I will find a place in the world where it can find peace and be free. But when you realize and you've attempted all of these with your whole heart, and they've all failed, relationships, even the idea of freedom, one of the things that maybe we come into experiencing now is like America, the home of the free. Won't go political on you guys this morning. But as we begin to really look at news beyond the, brought to you by Pfizer spectrum, we will see a different America that has been here, that's been co-opted or changed. And so democracy and all of these things that we have believed would also bring us freedom and peace of mind and safety, and we would all have our, little place in the sun, that's also seeming to fade. So everything in the world, if you've noticed, is kind of dimming or shifting. And the lack of fulfillment is going up. And this is perfect for awakening. I'm going to prophesy here. There will come a time, not that I'm looking for it, because I'm learning my lesson about looking for other bodies to give me validation, but there will come a time where this message will be thirsted for. It's not here yet. Very few are getting it and wanting it. But as the level of disquiet and dissatisfaction increases, so does the looking for where it can truly be found. So until you realize you're miserable, you're not going to want this path. And then when you want this path, as we've pointed out in previous talks, you're going to undergo what he calls a period of unsettling, where things that you believed were of value are being taken away. You're losing people, you're losing jobs, you're losing loved ones to death and disease. All of these things are coming in floods when you choose to go on this path of truth, perhaps. And it's all there to increase your motivation, to show you which way not to go. You can't find it there. And once you begin to realize that all of the things that are being taken away are for your own good, you'll begin to pick up the pace because you'll begin to feel that beyond coming into your experience, that hand of God, that presence of Divine Mother or Holy Spirit, however way you want to look at it. You will no longer be walking the road alone, and your misery will lighten. And as the mother Mira Alfassa said at one point, she says, when you're on this path, it feels like you're in darkness and you're having moments of light. And that encourages you and it propels you onward. She says, but you cross a threshold eventually through this one-pointed commitment to walk the path where you cross over from the realm of darkness into light. And no longer is it darkness with momentary flashes of light. It's light upon light and glory upon glory. You will reach that in your earth walk when you stay focused and committed. It won't always be the dark tunnel. You will have that transfiguring state of awareness coming in. But until you realize that you want it above all else, And if you were to only go in the other direction, because there's only two, towards the world or towards God, that there's misery, there's joy. Right? So you begin to really assess, and it begins to pay off. Good? Yeah, there you go. Mañana. So let's go, for our remaining time here, into the experience of the self. So he says at one point, everyone has experienced what he would call a sense of being transported beyond himself. This feeling of liberation far exceeds the dream of freedom, sometimes experienced in the special relationship. It is a sense of actual escape from limitations. If you will consider what this transportation really entails, you will realize that it is a sudden unawareness of the body and a joining of yourself in something else in which your mind enlarges to encompass it. It becomes part of you as you unite with it, and both become whole, as neither is perceived as separate. What really happens is that you have given up the illusion of a limited awareness and lost your fear of union. The love that instantly replaces the fear extends to what has freed you and unites you with it. And while this lasts, you are not uncertain of your identity and would not limit it. You have escaped from fear to peace, asking no questions of reality, but merely accepting it. You have accepted this instead of the body and have let yourself be one with something beyond the body, simply by not letting your mind be limited by the body. So this is who am I tosses out all of the story you have of I am this body, I am me, of course I'm John. All of this blather that we talk about to ourselves, that is a hypnotic reinforcement of the construct. All of that gets shredded, dissolved, shined away. And he says when we then go beyond wanting to be the body, we allow all the limitations to dissolve, we then can join with everything. Everything becomes part of us, and we can communicate and feel it. It's not distant, it's very close. It's right in our awareness. So that chair seems spatially to be 10 feet from me, but how far away is it in my awareness of it? My awareness of the chair is right here. My awareness of everyone is right here. If somebody is across the globe and I'm aware of them, I'm right there. This is getting to the substratum of consciousness. It's non-local. It isn't in time and space, and it's made of knowledge and information. It's truly the internet, but it's a divine internet. And when you plug in, you are aware of it, and it is aware of you. That's what he's saying. And he says, as we move on in that passage, it's like the ripple of the ocean that was so bent on just being the little ripple finally allows itself to return into experiencing itself as the ocean. Or that little sunbeam that tried so hard to be an individual apart from the globe of the sun allows itself to go back into the radiance of the sun. This requires no effort on our part. It requires a willingness, a commitment, a devotion to allow it to return to our awareness. Now listen to something beautiful. He says here, the sudden expansion of the self that takes place with your desire for it is the irresistible appeal the holy instant holds. So he does a good job of languaging it as the holy instant, because it's right here, this instant. We overlay this instant with past concepts and beliefs or future projections. But if we were to clear this linear time model of our mind, of being the body, this instant is the gateway. You don't have to go anywhere. It's right here. The sudden expansion of the self that takes place with your desire for it is the irresistible appeal the holy instant holds. It calls to you to be yourself with its safe embrace. There are the laws of limit lifted for you to welcome you to openness of mind and freedom. Come to this place of refuge where you can be yourself in peace, not through destruction, not through breaking out, but merely by a quiet melting in. For peace will join you there simply because you have been willing to let go the limits you have placed on love and joined it where it is and where it led you. So again, I ask you to do a check-in here and bring your attention to where you are. And see if you can allow all distractions to melt away and just accept this instant on God's terms. And as every thought will arise moment after moment, you can be this witness and say no to every arising thought that seeks to distract you. In the Upanishads, it's not this, not that. Whatever's arising, that's not the self. Neither is that. And you clear, and you develop that internal strength and brightness. And as you let all of these thoughts that are trying to come in dissolve with your no, no limitation will be in the field or space of the mind. Even the sense of the body will begin to dissolve, and you can feel your mind or your awareness flow out into the space. Like the ripple returning to the ocean. And as you stay within this dissolving of thoughts and opening to presence, you can keep your eyes closed and listen to this. God cannot come into a body, nor can you join him there. Limits on love will always seem to shut him out and to keep you apart from him. The body is a tiny fence around a little part of a glorious and completely limitless idea. The body draws a circle, infinitely small, around a very little segment of heaven, splintered from the whole, proclaiming that within it is your kingdom, where God can enter not. Within this kingdom, the ego rules, and cruelly. And to defend this little speck of dust, it bids you fight against the universe. This fragment of your mind is such a tiny part of it that could you but appreciate the whole, you would see instantly that it is like the smallest sunbeam is to the sun, or like the faintest ripple on the surface of the ocean. In its amazing arrogance, this tiny sunbeam has decided it is the sun. This almost imperceptible ripple hails itself as the ocean. Frightened is this little thought, this infinitesimal illusion, holding itself apart against the entire universe. The sun becomes the sunbeam's enemy, which would devour it, and the ocean terrifies the little ripple and wants to swallow it. Yet neither sun nor ocean is even aware of all this strange and meaningless activity. They merely continue, unaware that they are feared and hated by a tiny segment of themselves. Even that segment is not lost to them, for it could not survive apart from them. And what it thinks it is in no way changes its total dependence on them for its being. The whole existence of this tiny little arrogant segment still remains in the sun and in the ocean. Without the sunbeam would be gone. The ripple without the ocean is inconceivable. And then finally here, such is the strange position in which those in a world inhabited by bodies seem to be. Each body seems to house a separate mind, a disconnected thought, living alone, and in no way joined to the thought by which it was created. Each of the tiny fragments seemed to be self-contained, needing each other for some things, but by no means totally dependent on their one creator for everything, and needing the whole to give them any meaning. For by themselves, they do mean nothing, nor have they any life apart by themselves. He then goes on to say that the sun and the ocean pale in comparison to who you truly are. That these are actually aspects of yourself arising within the great field of your awareness. And this tiny little segment of ourself that struggles to be this little body is shutting all of this knowledge, all of this beauty, all of this joy out. And what's really remarkable is that we can actually come here and have a conversation like this that is so unlike anything you'll hear in the world, and yet it makes perfect sense to a part of your mind that already knows this, that already feels this. And so that alone is testament to the fact that your awakening to your true and glorious self is inevitable. And the more you want it, and want it only, the faster, seemingly, it will come. So we'll end it there. I'd like to hear from you guys. If anybody has any feedback or questions that they'd like to ask or share, I'd be happy to spend a few minutes for that. And then we'll have the blue bag go around. Yeah, it's chapter 18. The section is number 7. It's the little garden. Yeah. We truly are, just not the version of ourselves that we think we are. Yes.
The idea of a divine internet.
Kind of like a mushroom. That's an inside joke. Anybody else? I mean, did you guys ever listen? I forget his name, but he's one of the leading mycologists in the world. He went on Joe Rogan a few years ago. He's, talks all about the wonders of mushrooms. You wouldn't believe what mushrooms do and are. And it literally, he says it, that because the bulk of their body is underneath these tendrils, they connect to every other mushroom on the whole globe, and they all communicate. It's really remarkable. Anybody else? Thoughts, questions? All right, let's bless the offering. Oh, forgot this wasn't clipped. Sorry, guys. And we are just bringing our attention to blessing the offering, thanking the givers, and charging the gifts that they may be instruments or seeds within the world to spark the desire to wake up in whatever form that looks like. And so it is. Amen. All right. Well, if you'd like to join us tomorrow night, A Course in Miracles meets here at 7:15. Love to see you guys. And I look forward to Tuesday night, our Sri Aurobindo class, where we'll be getting more into this as we go along in that beautiful book. I wish you a beautiful Sunday. Let's rise and seal the deal. And as we come to the quietness of the heart, we just allow the Holy Spirit, the divine guidance, to work in our life, to bring us closer and closer to that point of awakening, that crossing point of light, so that we will know that the light of God surrounds us, the love of God enfolds us, the power of God protects us, and the presence of God watches over us. Wherever we are, God is. Amen. Again, beautiful Sunday to you guys. Thank you for being here. Love and blessings.